Well, thank you all for coming indoors on a beautiful summer afternoon. I am here to talk to you about my book about birds. I started bird watching when I was very young. There we go. And my father's an ornithologist, so that probably had something to do with my early interest in birds. But for as long as I can remember, I enjoyed drawing and I enjoyed birds, and the two things went together perfectly. Drawing is just a great way to learn about something, and there's so much to learn about birds. So for me, birding and drawing have always been one thing, a combination that I could never separate. This is a drawing of a peregrine falcon that I did in 1969 when I was about 8 years old. It's copied from one of my father's bird books. And here's me at about age 13. My father, being an ornithologist, could offer lots of opportunities to me, like bird banding. So I learned bird banding when I was very young. And that, I look back as one of the really important aspects of my early bird study. The opportunity to hold a bird in your hand, to feel it, to get that extra sense involved is so much richer than just looking at it through binoculars. So a lot of my early birding experiences was actually holding the birds in my hand, feeling them, the incredible amount of life and energy that's packed into that little tiny body, and they're so small. This is a sharp-tailed sparrow. It probably weighs about 13 grams, half an ounce. So to put that in perspective, you could put 2 in an envelope and mail them anywhere for 1 stamp. And kinglets, birds like ruby-crowned kinglets, are much smaller, 6 grams, 5 grams. Imagine putting 5 in an envelope for 1 stamp. So that experience of feeling the energy, the life, and the seeing the birds up close and then being able to release them and watch them fly away was really magical. All the bird banding experiences that I had as a kid were just great. And I also, early on, had an interest in books, or at least in gathering information and compiling it. This is an early example of a book project that I worked on as a teenager, The Warblers of Connecticut. And this is a limited edition of 1, made with a typewriter and colored pencils and glue and photographs. But sketching was the one constant in my birding experience. So I was always, when I was birding, I always had a notebook or a sketchbook and tried to draw the birds that I saw. And drawing, it really is just a way to focus your attention. For me, that's what it was. My drawing has always been about information. So it's true scientific illustration. And looking at a bird like this white-winged crossbill, this is the first white-winged crossbill I ever saw, so I could have identified it with seeing the white on the wings and the crossed bill, and you know it's a white-winged crossbill, check it off on your life list and move on. But in order to do this relatively simple sketch, just a pencil outline with a few details added in, there are hundreds of questions that I had to ask. And I sometimes describe sketching as being like an interview with the bird. It's a structure that forces you to ask those questions, to look more carefully, to wonder and ask, what shape is the head? How big is the bill relative to the head? Where is the eye? What shape are the white markings on the wings? And all those questions then get translated into pencil lines on the paper. But it's really all about the process of looking that carefully and asking those questions and learning those things. Once you've gone through all those steps, you really know what that bird looks like. So when people ask me about sketching and how to draw birds, I think it's really just about observation and practice, and each sketch is just practice for the next one. And one of the best bits of advice I can give for sketching is to just think of each sketch as something that you're never going to look at again. It's all about learning. You're not producing something that you're going to hang on the wall. It's not going to be your Christmas card. It might go in the trash, but you'll learn something from it, and your next sketch will be better, and the next one after that. So this is a photograph of me sitting in the back of a friend's car in Maine, and I'm sketching a northern hawk owl, and we'll get back to that one in a minute, but I'll start with the first northern hawk owl I ever saw, which was within a few weeks of that white-winged crossbill, so you'll notice a similarity in the style of sketching when I was about 13 years old. So this was one that we saw, watched it for a few minutes on a family trip, and then we drove away, and I did these sketches in the car as we were leaving, just to have something to remember it by. Now, 7 years later, I had just finished college after almost a year and decided to go bird watching full-time. So I left college, and this is the beginning of my full-time bird watching and sketching. So this hawk owl was wintering in Portland, Maine, and this is the first sketch that I did on this day, just testing out some lines, testing out some ideas for how to draw it. This is practice. And later that day, after a series of 5 or so other sketches, several hours of watching and sketching, I'm starting to get a better understanding of what a hawk owl looks like and how to draw it. Now, I went back 3 days later and spent several more hours with the same hawk owl, and I did this. This is like the in-depth interview. This is really looking at the bird, asking every question that I can think of, and really getting to know it. And just as an exercise, to spend an hour or so on this one sketch. And after that, after learning through that sketch, I was able to do this kind of sketch, which starts then, now that I've got the sort of the basics, the fundamentals of the hawk owl in my mind, I can start to do sketches that capture some of the movement, the character, the overall shape with just a few lines, and experiment with more subtle things. Now, 7 years later, and I've spent those 7 years basically bird watching and sketching full-time, traveling all over the country, living in a camper van, learning as much as I could about birds and drawing, and this is one of the drawings that I did sitting in the back of my friend's car in that photograph in Maine. This is actually a very unusual field sketch for me. This is very detailed. It's really a finished pencil drawing. And part of that is that hawk owls make fantastic subjects for drawing, because those of you who have seen hawk owls will know that they just sit still. They sit on one branch, they'll sit on top of a flagpole, one really prominent perch, and they'll stay there for hours. So you can really set the telescope on it, work on your sketch for 5 minutes, and look back at the bird in the telescope. It will still be there. So most of my field sketches, I will show, are more like this. Very quick pencil drawings. This is Leeches storm petrels drawn from the deck of the Blue Nose Ferry in the Gulf of Maine. And what this represents is probably 45 minutes of watching and maybe 5 minutes of actually putting pencil on paper. There's a tremendous amount of just looking, and 5 minutes of looking, and then some very quick scribbling on the paper, testing some things out, look at the birds some more, look at the sketch, look at the birds, look at the sketch, figure out what's wrong, what I need to change, and then do a little more scribbling. So this is a typical field sketch. And here's another more recent typical field sketch. People often ask me how I can draw a bird in the wild when it's so hard just to see them. And a subject like these hooded warblers, we're on a path